Well, good morning, everyone in New Zealand, and good afternoon, y muy buenas tardes, to those of you joining us from Mexico or the United States. My name is Matthew Omar. I'm the Director of the Latin America Centre of Asia Pacific Excellence, or LATAM CAPE, based at Victoria University of Wellington. I'll be your host for the exciting discussion we're about to have over the next 90 minutes, which we're bringing to you with the support of the Latin America New Zealand Business Council. In our audience today, we have the ambassadors of New Zealand and Mexico to each other's countries, a former APEC executive director, and a great mix of businesses, officials, scholars, commentators, and members of the public in many countries. And I know all of you are looking forward to hearing from our stellar lineup of speakers. Before I explain to you how this morning's event will run, I should introduce our Latin America CAPE to those of you meeting us for the first time. Founded in 2017, we are one of 3 government-funded centres of Asia Pacific excellence, creating a step change in New Zealanders' Asia Pacific skills and knowledge to support greater economic growth. Like the other CAPEs focused on North Asia and Southeast Asia, we develop the capability of businesses and young people to engage with our regions and draw on university expertise and networks to achieve that goal. In the case of this particular CAPE too, we also look to bring New Zealanders closer to Latin America through raising awareness of the region and the benefits of engaging with it. For it's fair to say that while some pioneering New Zealand businesses, including 2 you will hear from today, do understand the opportunities the Latin American market offers, others do not. Indeed, many companies either view Latin America superficially or do not view it at all. For these reasons, therefore, we have created a trade environment series to examine underexplored opportunities for New Zealand commercial links with Latin America. We began the series last year with a really rich webinar on New Zealand, Chile, and trade diversification, in which one of our speakers today participated. And over the next 6 months, we'll be doing other themes too. We'll be joining or leading events on the Southern Link, on Australasian approaches to Latin America, importing from Latin America, and related themes. But it's this morning's topic we've all gathered for, and it's particularly relevant to our businesses, policymakers, and opinion leaders as we rethink how our country trades with the world under the dual influences of COVID and geopolitical tensions. For very pressing reasons, the word supply chains are increasingly heard in debates about how we export and import. But so far, there has been little exploration of unfamiliar geographic opportunities in the new world we're in. So this morning's conversation on New Zealand, Mexico, and North American supply chains aims to do something about that. And so it's my great pleasure to invite New Zealand's ambassador to Mexico, Her Excellency Sarah Meiman, to welcome you to it. Sarah.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you to the Latin America CAPE for organizing this event, and to the excellent lineup of speakers who are here today to share their insights on how New Zealand business can take advantage of opportunities in Mexico to strengthen and diversify their supply chains. The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced just how quickly markets and supply chain realities can change, and how important it is that we build resilience, diversity, and agility into Aotearoa New Zealand's trading profile. This is the focus of the government's trade recovery strategy, putting New Zealand businesses in the best possible position to recover from the impacts of COVID-19 and to seize new opportunities for exports and investment. The strategy has 3 pillars: support services for exporters, reinvigorating international trade architecture, and refreshing key trade relationships. With a more than 3,000 kilometer border with the United States and a recently updated free trade agreement, the USMCA, or TMEC as it's known in Mexico, Mexico is extremely well placed to feed into North American supply chains. Mexico is a key player in manufacturing, including in the automotive, aviation and aerospace, medical device, apparel and textile, and consumer products industries, as well as its strong links into the US and Canadian markets through USMCA. Mexico can be used as a manufacturing hub for access into other Latin American markets. Mexico is a member of the Pacific Alliance Trading Bloc alongside Chile, Colombia, and Peru, and has a free trade agreement with Central American countries. Mexico is New Zealand's largest trading partner in Latin America, and trade between our countries has been growing since we became free trade partners under the CPTPP in 2018. Underpinned by that agreement, business links are going from strength to strength. And these closer trade links also increase the opportunities for incorporating Mexico into New Zealand's supply chains. Several of our manufacturers already have a presence in Mexico, and we'll be hearing of their experiences later in this session. Others are actively scoping out opportunities to use Mexico as a base to connect to global value chains and provide a backup for their New Zealand manufacturing capacity in case of interruption. We recognize that with opportunities also come challenges, and Mexico is not a straightforward or familiar market for many businesses. Competition is strong. However, we hope that today's event will provide some valuable insights and food for thought on how your business might be able to consider Mexico more closely. And we will certainly be taking note of what support you are looking for from us here on the ground in Mexico, both at the embassy and in our offices in Nzte as you explore these opportunities. Thank you very much for coming along today, and it's my pleasure to pass the floor back to Matthew to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Sarah, for that great welcome. We're almost ready to hear from our speakers. Just a reminder to attendees, first of the points I emailed you about yesterday. The webinar is being recorded. We'll be making this recording public and producing a report afterwards. You can ask questions of the speakers, which we will save to deliver later through the Q&A function. You can raise other logistic matters through the chat function, and we'll be answering the questions after panelists have spoken. That's roughly going to be in about 50 minutes time. Before then, we're going to have a lineup of the great speakers. Each will speak for about 7 minutes, and I'll ring a little bell when they each have a minute left, and then twice when their time is up. So without further ado, it's time to get into our first section, and this is on the North America trade environment. There'll be 3 speakers in this section, and it's going to look at trade agreements and other factors shaping the current context governing trade in North America today. So we could not begin in a better way than with the Honourable Tim Grosser. Tim is a former New Zealand Minister of Trade and Ambassador to the United States, the WTO, and Indonesia. He's an eminent global trade negotiator, was the WTO's former chair of agricultural negotiations. Tim, over to you to set our conversation up with some thoughts on the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement and the relevance of North American trade deals in today's discussion to New Zealanders.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're all into, my fellow participants. I'm going to put forward some headline conclusions I have and then backtrack from them to make some analysis that I think justifies those conclusions. The first thing I'd say is that well before the pandemic struck us and caused chaos in supply chains around the world, the nature of the global business model and therefore supply chains was undergoing very, very important changes. Some of them actually very promising for New Zealand, suffering traditionally as it had been from the tyranny of distance. My second conclusion is that it is enormously positive for Mexico in particular that the NAFTA was politically refreshed in a giant landslide bipartisan vote in the House that provides, even if the provisions on the auto rules of origin are going to be problematic for Mexico, provides enormous degree of political protection, given that roughly 2/3 of Mexico's exports are party-related exports, i.e. part of global regional supply chain in the North American market. So that's a very strong positive, I think, that underwrites Mexican economic policy over the next few years. The third is that the pandemic will change attitudes in a generally conservative way. I think that will reinforce my first point about not the end of globalization, as some breathless analysts are characterizing it, but a very different form of globalization over the next few years. And my last point is everyone should just tie-ho on drawing long-term conclusions about US trade policy. I have a very particular, not a commonplace view about this that's related to what I think is the real agenda of the Biden administration, but I'll come to that later. And my last conclusion is that the Build Back a Better World initiative, let me be blunt, is like designing a marketing program before you've designed even a prototype model for the marketing. So I'm along with the skeptics in the United States on this at the moment. So those are my conclusions. Now let me try and, in the remaining minutes, just put some flesh on those bones. First of all, the shifts in the global supply chain or business model. If we look back to the great era of globalization, that roughly 20-year period between 1990 and 2010, the GFC being a watershed event, where the global stock of FDI literally tripled in relation to global GDP over that period. And the ratio of global trade to global GDP doubled to around about 28, 29%. It's a profound shift started to take place. This was the beginning of real doubts about taking the lean manufacturing model to the nth degree. And actually the first time I became aware of this was not through a trade shock to it, but through the volcano in Iceland, because they closed down the Bavarian auto plants run by Mercedes, BMW, and Audi. Why? Well, how could a volcano in Iceland close it down? Because they disrupted air traffic into Europe, and therefore the semiconductor chips from Taiwan couldn't reach the manufacturers, so they had to close the factories down. So I think, a simple way of putting this is that 2010 is a rough date to mark the end of that era of cost cutting, searching out lower labor costs, not that that is over completely, and towards emphasizing more resilience, a word that's been used several times already this morning, and towards a more conservative approach to inventory control. Now, any global crisis changes attitudes, particularly political attitudes. To give you a simple example, it would be inconceivable that we would have seen in most of the developed world the rise of the welfare state without the searing experiences of the Great Depression. This is a global crisis, not on the same level as that, but this is a global crisis. It will change attitudes both politically and commercially on supply chain models. And I can't predict how far this will go, but I think you could put your money on it being in a more conservative direction. My next point about Mexico, look, I think that what happened in terms of then, first of all, the threats by President Trump to rip up the NAFTA, which would have caused absolute chaos to North American supply chains had it gone ahead. But then the successful renegotiation of elements of the NAFTA in the USMCA. This should be seen, if I were a Mexican citizen, I would see this a net huge positive, because I don't think anyone anytime soon in the United States will want to revisit that issue. So I think you've got a level of stability that will prove to be an enormous asset in very turbulent times. Looking out more generally to US trade policy, I know what the conventional view is. The conventional view is that they've gone to sleep, the Biden administration, on trade. They haven't bothered to try and renew fast track, or as we call it now, Trade Promotions Authority. My own view is a little different. I can see the germs of an approach where they're seeking to strengthen the issues around infrastructure, very flexibly defined, to try and deal with the huge anxiety of the American middle class that's been legitimately directed against trade policy over the course of the last 10 or so years, if not longer. And I think assuming that they do get some of these fundamental shifts changed, they will then realize that they have to have a trade policy. So I see a sequence here. I could be wrong, but I'm prepared to take a bet on the United States looking very seriously at what the withdrawal of the United States from TPP, and of course I was the administrator of those negotiations when I was trade minister right throughout the engagement of the United States. I think we should watch this space on this. And finally, well, I think I've sort of covered off the build a better world, but just let me add a few cautionary comments to back that up. Obviously, this is meant to be a political antidote to the BRI and this Chinese BRI initiative, and efforts to try and deny that are just simply lack all credibility. But if we look at the BRI initiative, the Chinese were actually doing the substance of this in Africa and some of the East Asian countries long before President Xi developed the slogan. This seems to me the other way around. And there's a very serious question marks that have been raised by some eminent US experts such as David Dollar as to whether the United States and the other G7 economies actually have got the capacity to compete on infrastructure. The private sector companies of those great developed countries can, but they will show a marked reluctance to go into these regions, whereas the Chinese, with their massive pool of $4 to $5 trillion savings and their enormous SOEs to do the actual infrastructure a better place. So I'm a skeptic on that, as my summary stated. So those are some opening comments, and I'm happy to elaborate them or go down a number of obvious related paths. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Superb start, and you've canvassed some of the issues already, and we're going to tease them out over the course of the next 45 minutes. Our next speaker offers a North American perspective. Indeed, our next two speakers offer North American perspectives. We begin with Kellie Meiman, a managing partner for McLarty Associates. Now, they're a Washington, D.C. leader in private sector diplomacy. They count Fortune 200 and emerging companies as their clients. And their global footprint is based or includes a strong Latin American focus. Kellie heads McLarty's trade practice, and we're delighted she can join us today. So Kellie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. And it's an honor to go after Minister Grosser. He actually understands us Americans, I think, better than we understand ourselves. And I would really just echo what he said about it. I'm less concerned about us not pursuing TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, or the previously called fast track renewal. Exactly because if you look at the trade agreements that the United States has done, going back to the Peru FTA, Congress has always tinkered with it. And so TPA is almost an academic notion at this point. And I would fully agree with the minister that the Biden administration focus right now is essentially to get trade negotiators the social license to operate, which they've lost over the years. And the very strong bipartisan vote that you saw for USMCA, part of it was due to some of the tweaks that were introduced over the course of the negotiation. Part of it, I would argue, is that it's like that old song, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Once Trump started threatening to dissolve NAFTA, you saw people that historically had been real, NAFTA critics speak up and say, actually, we need those integrated supply chains, because at the end of the day, North America under NAFTA was more than just a trade agreement. It was a competitiveness zone. It is how we have been able to compete with Asia and with other nations in our manufacturing sector, autos being the most integrated one. And it was, again, getting back to what Congress does after those agreements are negotiated. It was the tweaks that Ways and Means Democrats, including as a staffer, Ambassador Catherine Tai, introduced with the rapid response mechanism on labor that really helped for our unions, which are very important Democratic constituency, as well as for congressional Democrats, to say, you know, this is an agreement that we can support. And so, again, that is one step in the direction of trying to rebuild a domestic consensus here in the United States around trade policy, around pursuing trade policy, at a time where that consensus is sorely lacking. And the implementation of USMCA at this point, I guess I'll just make a couple of points, given that so much of the agreement was NAFTA. You know, a lot of it didn't need to be implemented. It already had been implemented. If you look at some of the major changes, if we're talking about the digital chapter, if we're talking about the rules of origin on autos, if we're talking about the labor provisions, you know, I think that there's a mixed track record of where we are on that. There's obviously a dispute, not just by the Mexicans, but also by the Canadians, that's been taken forward on the implementation of the rules of origin on autos, and some, shall we call them, misunderstandings on what was agreed to in the talks, which I won't go into that detail, but if anyone's curious, I'd be happy to respond to it in questions later. That is layered on top of the uncertainty that already exists for the auto sector, given that we don't have the uniform regs agreed to yet either. So the auto sector is one I would really put a spotlight on, where we need to get aligned. We need to have the rules of the road much more clear to be sure that we are continuing to unlock the potential in that sector. The labor provisions, well, I would say that, you know, they were, you know, from wages being a component of rules of origin in autos to the rapid response mechanism that I referred to before. It's actually particularly the rapid response mechanism. We have two cases that have been filed by the United States, one with the General Motors plant, the other one Tridenex, a parts manufacturer, where I think that we have taken some steps in the right direction to show that trade agreements can defend workers' rights at the same time that they try to create rules of the road that allow for companies to invest and grow with certainty. And so I think I would call that a positive. I know there was a concern by a number of us that there might be nuisance cases that were filed, or that the way that the cases might be pursued might create uncomfortable, you know, dynamics between the U.S. and Mexico. And I've been really encouraged by the fact that what you've seen with the cases that have been filed thus far. And remember, this is a president, President Biden, that really wants to be the most pro-labor U.S. president in modern times. And what we've seen are American negotiators and Mexican, American trade officials, I should say at this point, and Mexican trade officials sitting next to each other side by side and saying, how can we use this agreement to try to be sure that labor provisions that we jointly agreed to are pursued in Mexico? So far, so good on that point. And I think that, you know, what you see as far as USMCA and projecting that into other agreements, there is a belief right now, I think particularly by congressional stakeholders, that this rapid response mechanism and that having labor standards as key to any sort of trade agreement is something that needs to be carried into future, if we do tweaks of other trade agreements, perhaps CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement, or if not in the short term, but if someday we talk about, you know, returning to TPP, CPTPP, I think that this labor aspect is something that the administration is grappling with, how that will come into play in future trade negotiations and in future trade discussions. And you even have some countries, Ecuador has approached the United States and saying that they would like to actually do a free trade agreement with the United States and have exactly the same labor language that Mexico has. And that's compelling. That's something that this administration is interested, not necessarily with Ecuador per se, that's just an example, but seeing how we can replicate that success of USMCA is something that they'll be looking forward to as we focus on our domestic and the build agenda. And this administration is very clear that the domestic agenda comes first. A foreign policy and a trade policy for the middle class comes first. And right now, you've probably seen our budget battles going on here in the United States, as well as an attempt to approve our domestic Build Back Better agenda. That needs to happen first, I think, before we get to that Build Back Better world that the minister was talking about. And so I think that's where you'll see the focus right now, as far as the administration's policy, as we also are looking at supply chains and how to make those more resilient. So I think I'm out of time, Matt, so I'll leave the rest to our conversation later.
Thank you very much, Kellie. Really appreciate that strong emphasis on the labour dimension there, which is interesting to hear. And again, we've got questions coming for you later. And folks, don't forget to send your questions in. And as you do, make sure to say who they're directed to. We'll probably be able to work that out, but just take away any element of doubt. As today's event is on New Zealand, Mexico, and North American supply chains, and because, of course, Mexico is part of North America, we'd need a Mexican view on the matters we're discussing. So our next speaker is not only the coordinator of the Master in Global Governance at the Jenkins Graduate School of the University of the Americas in Puebla, and the executive director of the Mexican chapter of the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. He was also an ambassador of Mexico to New Zealand from 2016 to 2018, so he knows New Zealand businesses well. So Dr. Gerardo Traslosheros, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Matthew, so much for the invitation, and it's great to be here among so many friends, new and old. And well, let me begin by saying that Mexico and the United States have recently relaunched their high-level economic dialogue involving top authorities from both countries after a suspension during the Trump administration. Earlier this month, the Mexican foreign minister and the economics minister were received by the US Vice President and the Secretary of State. The US Secretary of Commerce and the US Trade Representative were also involved in the talks. The US is most serious about bringing more prosperity to Mexico and help develop its destitute South and also develop Central America to assist in reducing the flow of migrants from these regions into the US southern border. Economic development now means greater security for all. This is a major shift from the previous administration, which only focused on persecuting illegal migration. The dialogue thus aims to promote growth, job creation, and poverty reduction. It offers to work jointly in the post-coronavirus era, preparing labor forces for the future and improving the business environment. Most importantly, the dialogue promotes strengthening and developing new US-Mexico supply chains. This will include reinforcing infrastructure, trade facilitation and innovation, and coordinating on critical industries to mitigate supply chain disruptions emerging from the trade war with China and COVID-19, exploring opportunities to complement supply chain needs, attract investment, and reduce vulnerabilities. This implies work in sectors such as ICT, microchips, and other critical components related to the development and supply of electric and automated vehicles and the aerospace industry, which are of interest to New Zealand. There will also be opportunities for New Zealand firms in industries linked to the digital economy and e-commerce, renewable energy, health, food supply, the environment, software development, and other new technologies which have a promising future in Mexico, which has a talented and productive scientific, engineering, and labor force. Mexico and New Zealand can complement each other in the post-coronavirus world more than ever. the US and Mexico will also work together towards a more competitive, better educated, and trained workforce. Mexico and the United States will invest in small and medium-sized enterprises and will promote social inclusion. The US-Mexico dialogue offers an extensive cooperation program for the full usage of the USMCA within the background of intensifying political tensions between the US and China and an accelerating technological change due to COVID-19. Negotiating the USMCA to replace NAFTA meant the strengthening of the rule of origin for automobiles, greater environmental protection, and stronger labor rights in Mexico to allow for full freedom of association and collective bargaining. It also meant reinforcing dispute resolution and reaffirming investment commitments. Strengthening existing supply chains and bringing new ones is not an easy task, as Mexico has to offer greater efficiencies to compensate for a more rigorous USMCA and enhance competition from Southeast Asia. According to the Economic Institute of Economics, the Institute of International Economics in Washington, firms needing to diversify from China because of rising Chinese cost and trade and investment restrictions are considering reorganizing production across Asia to complement the continuing Chinese operation, or to shift investment out of Asia to shorten supply chains serving the US market. Mexico is a natural choice for nearshoring investment because it is closely linked to the US market by the USMCA. Mexico does face significant competition for investments in supply chains. However, the high-level economic dialogue offers to support Mexico in its effort to become a nearshoring hub for supply chains. Mexico needs to reinforce domestic economic and security policies to become a more attractive destination to both domestic and foreign investors. Diversifying sourcing from Asia is challenging. Mexico benefits from preferential market access to its major export market, the US. Due to domestic resistance, it will be very difficult for the US to negotiate new FTAs in the foreseeable future. So Mexico will remain a key alternative for investors willing to attend the North American market. Notwithstanding the economic effects of COVID-19, Mexico is a solid economy which enjoys sound fiscal and monetary policies, and that has the advantages of having an array of international trade and investment agreements, a working democracy, a solid judiciary, and a stable exchange rate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerardo. A lovely thank you, Gerardo. A lovely transition there between the previous two speakers and the speakers we're about to come from next, because we're now about to bring the discussion right back to the business environment of Mexico. And so again, we've got a trio of speakers here. And so the first of them is, and the point of this next section is to help people attending this webinar see that New Zealand companies not only could do well in Mexico, they're already doing well in Mexico. And so we begin with the Latin American New Zealand Business Council member and one of New Zealand's highest profile companies, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. As you may have seen in the New Zealand media, it has a compelling story to tell about how it has thrived in Mexico, both before and in the COVID context. So its Vice President Corporate, Marcus Driller, has kindly agreed to share with you some of the headlines of that story today. So Marcus, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Matthew, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So while Fisher & Paykel Healthcare is now the largest listed company on the New Zealand Stock Exchange by market capitalisation, worth about $18 billion today, back in 2009, we were valued at less than $2 billion, and all of the manufacturing for our medical devices, some of which you'll see behind me, came out of our facilities here in East Tamaki in Auckland. So after 40 years of being in business, we had made our way to being the global leader in respiratory humidifiers and consumables, and they're used for patients throughout the hospital. You've probably seen some of them recently, unfortunately, in COVID patients who are in intensive care using breathing tubes. They're probably our products. But back in 2009, we were conscious that if something happened to Auckland and we couldn't supply our products to those patients in intensive cares and hospitals around the world, then those patients wouldn't have been able to be treated. So we started looking for another country in which we could manufacture that would reduce our risk from a geographic perspective. So we considered a number of countries, but ultimately settled on Tijuana in Mexico. And the major factors that contributed to the decision at the time were in Tijuana, state of Baja California, there's a really large medical device manufacturing hub. There are more than 40 companies with more than 40,000 people. Obviously, the proximity to our major North American markets, the low and relatively stable manufacturing costs, bilingual Spanish, English, it was helpful, and also the working day overlap with Auckland. So while we thought we understood all these benefits, I think it's fair to say as Kiwis with this DIY mentality, we're going to go and show the Mexicans how to manufacture. Turns out that we were very mistaken, and our team were, I guess, just blown away by what we've learned from our people in Mexico over the last 12 years, and they've actually really taught us how to manufacture quality medical devices. So much so that we've imported about 50 Mexican nationals to come and work with us down here in Auckland over that period. So why do we choose Tijuana? As I mentioned before, it's a medical device hub. It used to be a hub for television sets. Before that all moved to China, and we ended up leasing a facility that used to manufacture Sony PlayStation 1s that had shut down and moved to China, and we came in, we took up this facility and converted it to a clean room where we could manufacture medical devices. Tijuana also has great access to ports, Port of Nzte, and also proximity to Long Beach and Los Angeles. And I guess we've been so impressed by our experiences in Tijuana that in 2017, about 4 years ago, we purchased 15 hectares of land ourselves with room to build 4 20,000 square metre facilities. We've now got 2 facilities in Mexico and about halfway through our 3rd one. And Mexico really has been a significant contributor to the success of our company. So we got to a point where pre-COVID, a third of our total volume was coming out of Mexico. It's been a big contributor to our improvement in gross margin to manufacture the same product in Mexico that we manufacture here in New Zealand. It's about a 25% cost reduction. I guess the biggest thing though has been the quality of the people, and the professional and well-educated workforce have really contributed to our success. And now got about 1,900 people in Mexico. We started with 130 back in 2010. And that team of 1,900 has really come to the fore over the last 18 months as we've had to ramp up production to meet global demand. It's been a real challenge, and we couldn't have done that without the efforts of our Mexican team, and really want to acknowledge that. Particularly at a period where COVID has been rife in Tijuana, in the community there, and also other parts of Mexico. So a huge effort. Maybe just quickly on the trade environment, the maquiladora regime, NAFTA, USMCA, we've found doing business in this part of the world very seamless, and the environment has been very supportive. So in closing, I guess there are 3 Ps which summarize why F&P Healthcare have really had a great experience in Mexico. That's been people. We've just had incredible people there, proximity to our large markets, and then prowess, or professionalism of our people. So with that, I'll hand that back to you, Matthew. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus, for that brilliant summary, and congratulations for all you've achieved. I know that people watch you really closely, and you've been very generous in sharing your knowledge over a number of years, including when our previous speaker was Ambassador of Mexico.
Yep.
Fisher and Paykel's success is down to many factors, and you've just heard three of them. One of which, but only one of which, was its proximity to US consumers. But our next speaker, who's also a company successful in Mexico, will show you that you don't actually need to be near the border to operate successfully in that country. So I now invite Greg Bella, the new CEO of Wellington Drive Technologies, to explain how his firm has succeeded in the Mexican market. Greg, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and kia ora, everyone. It's great to have an opportunity to share a little about Wellington Drive's journey in LATAM, but with a particular focus on Mexico. Before I launch into it, though, Wellington is a technology company that provides cloud-based IoT solutions and electronic hardware to help commercial refrigeration organisations interact with their customers, operate their fleet effectively while providing safe and high quality goods through their refrigeration systems. We provide an app and cloud-based ecosystem to support our customers' sales and marketing teams. Service technicians, manufacturing teams and storekeepers get the best out of their refrigeration units. Our story is a little bit different to Fisher & Paykel. So we are based in Auckland for our design centre, but we manufacture currently in Vietnam and ship to Mexico. We do have a distribution centre in Mexico, which is about 2 hours north of Mexico City. Our LATAM business started in Mexico in 2010, and approximately 30% of our company's revenue now is generated in Mexico, and 50% of our revenue is generated in the wider wider LATAM region. We still see we have significant growth potential in the region, both from increasing market share and expanding the market with new products and solutions. But what are the reasons for us being physically present in Mexico? We have a small team compared to Fisher & Paykel, about 15 people in Mexico. But what we have found is that the talent in Mexico is fantastic. And so we're really proud of our team. To support our customers, we found it's been a really big competitive advantage to have people on the ground in Mexico. Our products are very technical. As an example, one of the products we sell has 109 different parameters that have to be adjusted. And so every time someone designs or develops a new refrigeration unit, they have to choose from these 109 different parameters. So having people technically on the ground to support customers is really, really important. And also, as we're launching now our Cloud Connect solution, having people on the ground to support customers that are not really used to using technology in this kind of way has been vital. And it's fair to say that if we didn't have people on the ground prior to COVID, but certainly through and post-COVID, we would not have been able to operate our business at all. And so it's only been to having great people on the ground and really capable people that has allowed us to be successful or continue to be successful in the region. In Mexico, we have people spread through the country to be close to our customers. And so it's local support for the manufacturers in Mexico that take our products and build them into their refrigeration units and connect them to the cloud is why we have people spread through the country. The other reason is, we have certainly found that relationships are key, and having local people who understand relationships and how to work within their environment has been vital to, and in some ways expected too, that you have that kind of personal connection. And that's really helped us by having capable people who are passionate about what they do in region. From a logistics perspective, as I said, we do have a warehouse or a distribution network in Mexico. We only hold a small amount of our material there. Most of our material gets shipped direct from Vietnam to the customer. But it has been vital to have some inventory there to manage, as people have talked through the variations that COVID has brought to the supply chain system. But it's also helped us from a business development perspective, having product available to support pilots and those business development pilots, etc., has been really important for us. From our business, only about 25% or maximum of 25% of what we ship into Mexico goes out of the region to the US. So most of it stays in region, but about up to 25% does find its way across the border to the US in refrigeration units that get exported from Mexico. We do share resources across the region because some of the customers that we serve in Mexico are also have offices in the US, and so there's movement of information and expertise across the region. What's next for us though is, COVID has certainly exposed us from a risk perspective. Our factory in Vietnam was shut down due to COVID for several weeks, which had a real impact on our business. It's up and running now. It has about 700 people living at the factory now, so to keep the factory going. But we are now actively working with Nzte to try and find a manufacturing location in Mexico. So we see that as a key thing for us going forward, to be close to our customers, but also de-risking from a supply chain perspective, particularly with an agreement with the US, so we can cover the region quite sensibly from Mexico. And lots of good expertise there to help us with that. We'll also be adding a software development group in Mexico. Again, COVID has really put pressure on us to be able to find expertise in New Zealand, and we've got a great team that we can build on and around in Mexico. So we'll be adding a software development capability in Mexico. So in summary, I guess COVID has really had an impact on the way we think about our business and support our business. And we've got a great team already in Mexico, and we're going to continue to build on that. I would really like to thank Nzte. They've been fantastic over the whole time of our journey in Mexico, and continue to support us, not only with connecting us with people, but with local expertise and helping us solve some of the issues that we're trying to solve to grow in Mexico. So really thanks to them as well.
Well, thank you, Greg. That was a great presentation. It's touched on many of the things which earlier speakers have mentioned. It almost did my next job for me, which is to introduce Nzte's Regional Director, Steve Jones. For those of you who read Steve's blogs on the Nzte website, or who attended our own CAPE's Latin America business videos launch earlier in the year will know, he's a very perceptive observer on the Latin American business environment. So, Steve, we look forward to your comments on fleshing out the story of keys for business in Mexico, business success in Mexico, and how more New Zealand firms may be able to respond or not to North American attention to supply chains.
Thank you, Matthew, and to your team at the LATAM Cape for organising this call, and kia ora tātou, greetings also to all the other panellists and attendees. Thanks, Greg, for those kind words about the experience that you've had with Nzte. And Wellington Drive Technologies is one of 12 companies that have approached the Nzte team in Mexico since the start of the year for advice on manufacturing in Mexico. So strong has the interest been that we're now in the process of producing a report to help guide companies through the factors that they need to consider. And I should, at this point, say special thanks to the Trade Commissioner, Rhiannon Berry, Business Development Manager, Eric Strevel, and our market analyst, Joao Raton, for their work on this report, which is almost complete and is about to be published. And if you're interested in a copy of this report, please leave a message in the chat and we'll work with the Cape to let you know when it's published. So 12 companies asking us questions about manufacturing in Mexico in the last 9 months. 12 months before that, our offices in Vietnam and Thailand experienced a similar flurry of inquiries. So what's going on? Why are manufacturers looking to diversify their supply chain? Well, it's a story that's familiar probably to everybody on this call. Current US tariffs on imports from China are more than 6 times higher than before the trade war began in 2018. Tariffs now account for nearly 20% of the cost of the majority of Chinese products imported into the US. Meanwhile, goods imported from Mexico or Asian low-cost countries are more or less exempt from tariffs, and they have lower labor costs than China. So is the exodus from China really happening? China's share of imports to the US has declined between 3.5% to 4% since 2018. In the same period, Mexico's share has remained stable, and Asian low-cost countries have increased their share by 3%. And anecdotally, New Zealand companies' response to the US imposition of tariffs on Chinese goods, if they were manufacturing in China, was initially to look at options in Asian low-cost manufacturing centers. Now, the surge that we are now seeing in Mexico seems to be a further development of the trend away from China, partly because of the tariff issue, but obviously compounded by COVID-led global supply chain disruption. And in this context, Mexico's trade policy and proximity to the US market offers New Zealand companies a way of mitigating the dual unpredictabilities of US-China trade tensions and global logistics challenges. And dare I say it, the impact of lockdowns and international travel challenges in New Zealand. So apart from simplifying the supply chain challenge for New Zealand companies looking to manufacture offshore for the US market, Mexico offers another advantage in its IP environment. Mexico has a more effective IP ecosystem than most Asian low-cost countries. This isn't necessarily something that many New Zealand companies consider as a top-of-mind issue when thinking about manufacturing offshore, but if it does become an issue, it quickly becomes a mission-critical issue. So the advantage that Mexico offers over Malaysia, China, Philippines, India, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia is quite substantial. So obviously Mexico has built a manufacturing sector geared towards producing goods for the US market. And the IMEX program is one of the pillars of the manufacturing sector. Its incentives and maquiladoras mean that over 3/4 of the people employed in manufacturing in Mexico are currently producing goods for export. And the majority of these companies are operating in states adjacent to the US border. The largest sector, as we've heard, by far is the automobile industry. It's about 78% of revenue by manufacturing subsector in Mexico. But there is also a very long tail of high value sectors in Mexico, including aerospace, medical devices, and consumer and industrial electronics, as we've already heard. And so many of the world's biggest brands are incorporating Mexican manufactured goods into their global supply chains. So how should New Zealand companies start thinking about beginning operations in Mexico? Well, the IMEX program offers a range of options for companies, And of course, the right option depends on the company's particular circumstances. There are models around standalone operations, there are models around contract manufacturing, and there are models around shelter companies. And each of them has its own pros and cons, depending on what the larger strategic agenda is for the company. Since the start of the year, we've been working very hard to connect companies to the best advisors to understand how to take advantage of the best option for their unique circumstances. We've started conversations with some of the top manufacturing states in Mexico to access relevant information for our customers. And that includes key stakeholders, incentives, what's happening at a federal level, what might be happening at a state level. And additionally, we're connecting with our Nzte colleagues in the US, who are also very familiar with integrating Mexican manufactured good into US supply chains. And there are a number of third-party providers in the US who have knowledge and networks that can support New Zealand companies identify contract manufacturers and QC functions in Mexico. Finally, again, we've been talking about the proximity, the fact that so many manufacturing operations are located along the border with the US. About 76% of the value of Mexican goods being landed in the US are transported by rail or road. So that just tells you a little bit about the geography and the logistics networks that currently exist. Beyond manufacturing, New Zealand companies can look to benefit from a logistics network that obviously links these key Mexican manufacturing clusters to major transportation hubs in the US for onward shipment. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, we're about to publish a report which expands on the summary that I've just given. Please register your interest via the chat and we'll let you know when it's available. If you're already an Nzte customer, feel free to discuss these issues with your customer manager, and the customer manager will link you with the team in Mexico. If you're not currently an Nzte customer, please get in touch with us via our website. And at that point, I'd like to hand back to Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Steve. Folks, we're almost ready to respond to your Q&A questions, but there's one final thing we need to do before that. We need to just make the point, it's an obvious point to many, that while we're discussing political issues, trade issues, and business issues, all these issues take place in a broader social and environmental context. So just to signal that point before we get into your questions, I'd like to call on the past president of the Council for Latin American Studies of Asia and Oceania, and a recipient of the Distinguished New Zealand Geographer Medal, Professor Warwick Murray of Victoria University of Wellington, to just offer some brief remarks on those themes.
Kia ora, Matthew, kia ora Toto and katoa, and buenos dias a todos. Que bueno ver amigos viejos y nuevos, as Gerardo said. I've heard some fascinating things this morning. It's been absolutely fantastic, everybody, and the perspectives very broad ranging. I'm the kind of elephant in the Zoom, as it were, in the sense that as an academic, I'm often asked to comment on broader contextual issues. I'll say right here, right now, clearly what Mexico wants and requires is investment, is good jobs, sustainability, and a just future. And of course, what we need in New Zealand is locations for our outward investment, and that there are fine examples of that going on. And clearly what the United States needs and Canada needs is nearshoring and the security in supply chains. I agree with Minister Grosser entirely that we're moving to a new era, really, of globalization. The kind of buccaneer phase is over, it seems, and we move into a kind of strategic, multipolar, possibly fairer, possibly more ethically oriented, more just and more green, perhaps. That does depend. And it's in that context that I'd just like to raise the following points. Clearly, the current agreement is progress in a social and, to a lesser extent, an environmental context on NAFTA, although it inherits most of it. But clearly, there are chapters in there, there are conditions in there which have improved. And that signals, I think, this post kind of buccaneer capitalist globalization era. But of course, this is taking place within a context. It's taking place within the context of what we might more broadly call a border crisis, the border crisis in Mexico, the vast inequality that Buccaneer globalization has led to in Latin America, which has led to the migration problems and flows that are occurring that are adding pressure at the border in Mexico and across Latin America. So my concern really is labor issues and environmental issues. Obviously, in terms of labor, Mexico, as we know, in terms of wage growth, in terms of productivity, has found it difficult to compete with the rest of the OECD. And that raises problems in terms of competitiveness in the United States. And it also raises problems for New Zealand investors as well. And the problem, I think, is perceptions, and perceptions of taking part in a system which is, at least from the outside, although we've seen improvements, potentially perceived as exploitative of labor and of the environment. Of course, in terms of environment, then, the big criticism from the Democrats in the United States, although eventually, of course, many more signed up than they did to NAFTA for lots of reasons that our distinguished guest from United States pointed out. But the fact that there are no explicit references to climate change and other environmental issues is a concern. Of course, all parties are signatories to reductions in emissions, of course, but again, Mexico less so than the other two. So my question really, in conclusion, well, there are two really. The first is, how do New Zealand companies avoid the perception of taking part in something which is unequal and exploitative of certain sectors of society and environment, although there have been improvements in that area? And more generally, how can we capitalize whilst at the same time moving to the new era of globalization, which should be just and much more sustainable? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Warwick. Important issues to raise because they certainly dominate our news media.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you. Firstly, we're now moving into question phase. But before we do, thank you so much to all the speakers for keeping superbly to time. We actually now have 20 minutes for questions. So let's crack right into them. They've come through, they can still keep coming through, and they'll be directed to an individual person. However, if other panelists would like to leap in as well, that you'd be more than welcome to do so. And Kellie, the first question is for you. Is this the right time, given supply chain and geopolitical crises, for the United States to fold back its offshore manufacturing operations from China to Mexico? Now, we've already heard Greg sort of reflect on that a little bit with his company's experience, but would you just be able to comment on that and also respond to any of the points that that Warwick just raised or other speakers have raised? So Kellie, over to you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. No, it really is the time, and it's, you know, obviously a number of companies dating back to the origins of the Trump trade war with China were really needing to look for other options. And so it depends on the sector. There are certain sectors that have more installed capacity existing in Asia, you know, in the Vietnams and et cetera, in Southeast Asia, than in Mexico. And so, you know, I think that in the first instance, that felt like, in some cases, an easier first choice. And I think that what you've seen with COVID and now the real complication of supply chains, I think we've all been reading the articles over the last week of, you know, these container ships floating off the coast of Los Angeles because they can't get into Long Beach. You've got publicly reported that Costco and Walmart have gotten their own ships contracted to try to make sure that they have their holiday assortments ready for Christmas shopping and this sort of thing for end of year. That has really caused a second inflection point, I would say, where companies are looking to see, how can I get as close as possible? How can I be as near shored as possible? And so that has had a number of companies giving, certainly Mexico, when you're talking some of the higher tech, as you know, we were hearing from Marcus with respect to, you know, his clean rooms and his medical manufacturing, where you've got kind of that higher tech manufacturing capability in Mexico, to even some simpler things if we're talking, textiles and apparel, and some agricultural production in Central America. So it certainly is a time to be looking at that. I do think that, as I was talking about before, the real focus on how can we be sure that we are growing these trade opportunities in a way that is responsible for workers. I think that will continue to be a focus from a US government perspective and from a Mexican government perspective. And I'm hoping that can, check some of those boxes and then some that Warwick was just talking about in the last segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kellie. Tim or Gerardo, would you like to comment on those? Tim.
Just to add one more dimension to what Kellie's been saying, we must always remember that while these multinational corporations, whether they're American or other countries' multinational corporations, have got a huge role in exporting from the United States as a place of final assembly, and that is trending out now of China for a variety of commercial, wage pressures, and political reasons. Don't forget that the China market itself is of enormous importance to many of these large companies. Just as Kellie was speaking, I was just quickly Googled and found that the Apple sales to Chinese consumers went up 58% last year. So, I mean, this is a 1.3 billion people market. It is absolutely enormous, and it will be a constraint against wholesale movement out of China. That's just the additional reflection. I agree with what she said, but I just want to add that point. We must not forget that.
Thank you, Tim. Gerardo, any comments on that?
I'd like to refer to Warwick's comments. Yes, when we negotiated the NAFTA, okay, long ago, it was clear that we try to keep environmental and labor provisions out of the main agreement. Okay, well, that is gone now, okay, because the environment and labor is included, okay, in the core of the agreement, and if you fail to comply, you're subject, okay, to dispute settlement and likely to suffer some penalties. So time has changed. The NAFTA, as I mentioned in my remarks, okay, the NAFTA reinforced, and also Kellie has mentioned that, the labor issues, the labor obligations, okay, are quite strong. There's a lot of monitoring by US labor unions, okay. There's an expedite mechanism, okay, to solve disputes at the plant level, okay. So I think that those concerns should be broadly erased, very frankly. And on the environmental side, also, the USMCA does have a lot of environmental provisions. The only reason why the climate change agreement is not explicitly mentioned is because Mr. Trump didn't like that issue, okay? Otherwise, we would be very much, of course, willing to support, and particularly with the Biden administration, okay, and through this high-level economic dialogue that I mentioned, okay, there's a lot of a connection between the concerns of the Biden administration, of course, and the response, okay, of the Mexican government, okay. So I would basically dismiss those concerns, regarding labor and the environment. Okay, we've evolved a long way on those regards. And one final mention, if I may, Matthew, regarding opportunities for New Zealand firms, because I saw there was a question there. I mean, there's plenty of them. I never ended getting more and more surprised, okay, by the capacities of the New Zealand talent, okay, to produce new and marvelous products. We're just seeing two examples here in this seminar, okay. But I would say that, of course, components for the new industries in the electric and automated vehicles, the aerospace industries, I would say also some others that have been mentioned, the digital economy, e-commerce, renewable energy, okay? There's some firms already established here working on renewable energy, health products, we have Fisher and Paykel, food supply, okay, there's a lot of complementarities there. We can also benefit from New Zealand technology. The environment, absolutely. Software development, we already saw the speakers mentioning that. New technologies, okay, there's a promising future between Mexico and New Zealand. In Mexico, I underline that Mexico has a talented and productive scientific, engineering, and labor force, okay?
Thank you, Gerardo. I think it's really important to note that this comment on Mexican talent is really has been come through loudly and clearly from several speakers here, that something that's not widely known about New Zealanders. And so we are trying to change the perception of Latin America in New Zealand to encourage more firms. It's one thing to present an opportunity, it's another thing to challenge perceptions. And Steve, I know you're working in that space too. I think another key point we've had so far is what Tim said about the stability of the Mexican environment through these agreements, and that's important. The next set of questions really are aimed at our three business speakers in the program. The first is a technical question. What percentage of profit do you have to leave in Mexico for future investment? Could you explain some of the tax around that to the degree that you're willing to share commercially sensitive information? And also, by the way, feel free to comment on the earlier question as well, if you wish. So, Marcus, shall we start with you on that one?
Sure, Matthew. So it's not a percentage of profit that we need to leave in Mexico. Fundamentally, how we would think of it, though, is that we want to continue to invest in creating new opportunities, new jobs for people in Mexico, and that was the move that we made with buying land there and constructing these new facilities. I think maybe where the question was going to is around addressing some of the points that Warwick made. It's around what can we do for our people and for the local community of Tijuana. So that we focus that largely around education. How can we provide education opportunities for our manufacturing employees based there, as well as their children, and then in the health space as well. Obviously, that's been a really big focus for us throughout COVID, and significant donations to local hospitals of our product to ensure that people can receive the treatment they need, just like they're in any other hospital around the world. So those are some of the things that we do in that space. Maybe over to you, Greg.
Yeah, look, I think well, it's different scale. That's the same kind of message from us, is we're investing actually in Mexico. So there's probably actually more money going the other way rather than coming this way. But we see it as a really important thing to be contributing there, making sure our people are, well supported in the region. So I guess from a taxation perspective, I couldn't actually quote how much flows each ways, but certainly at the moment we would have probably a net flow the other way is what's happening at the moment.
Thanks, Greg. My next question is for Steve. Steve, you'll be aware that the Capes are focused on Latin America, North Asia, and Southeast Asia, and you began to talk about shifts in manufacturing between the different Cape regions. How significant do you think that shift is likely to be? I mean, we can't predict the future, but Now firms are approaching you about these diversification opportunities. Do you anticipate that will increase or continue while we get out of COVID and the world gets slightly more normal on that front? Or do you expect this to continue, this new trend you've seen over the last 9 months?
Thanks, Matthew. The experience of our team in Vietnam and Malaysia was that there was initial flurry of inquiries, which fizzled out, and I'm not sure why that might have been. I might speculate that it was because the logistics and supply chain challenges that came post-COVID may have caused them to reassess the viability of manufacturing in Asia for the US market. There's also a factor which I think is in play in Mexico, which may not be in play in Asia, which is you've got these marquee companies like Fisher & Paykel Healthcare who are now demonstrating the benefits of what can be done with a diversified manufacturing and supply chain strategy, very much with a North American market destination in mind. And the more companies that successfully prove that business model, the more interest there is likely to be from New Zealand companies in replicating that. Now, we've got to acknowledge that Fisher & Paykel Healthcare is not your normal New Zealand SME that's trying to do that, but as maybe a pathfinder company of sorts, it generates a lot of interest in what might be possible for other more normal sized New Zealand companies. And it's really interesting to hear Greg talking about that. I mean, Greg might be able to talk about your own thinking about why you might be looking to transfer some of that manufacturing from Vietnam to Mexico, and what are the factors that are influencing that strategic shift.
Certainly, I could add a little comment on that. Certainly, COVID was one of these disruption to supply chain, I guess. But also, we see the value of being, our Mexican operation is really supporting our customers in Mexico. So having local capability is one of the things that we're looking at, as opposed to so much shipping to the US or other locations. That say, we have a big customer base in Latin America generally, and so having a manufacturing capability there to shorten supply chains and take advantage of some of the real talent that we see there from a technical perspective is really the reasons that we're thinking about it.
Thank you, Greg. Over to you, Tim.
I just want to link a few of the really interesting comments together to talk around the concept that Kellie introduced with a slightly different framework around her thinking, around trade negotiators operating in the United States historically without a social license to extend the boundaries of globalization, that now being addressed. But I also think that concept of a social license comes back to the point that Professor Murray was making. I've always worried about the concept of the triple bottom line in terms of how businesses around the developed world largely would interpret this. In other words, was just this PR BS, or were they going to take it seriously? So I was very pleased to hear Marcus talk about what FPH is doing in Tijuana to work with the local communities, because my view is if a company thinks this is just about a glossy advertising thing, they will fall flat on their face eventually, because of the point that Kellie's useful phrase, social license, has real meaning. And I'd like to give you a negative example of another investment by New Zealand in Latin America, where I think insufficient attention was given to these realities, and that's Ciprole down in Chile. So I'm not trying to assign blame. I have no idea. I've never done an investigation who was to blame for this. But Frontera owns 99% of Ciprole, which is Chile's roughly Chilean dairy market is divided into three. And this is one of the big three. and Fonterra owns 99% of it. And really the proverbial hit the fan down in southern Chile, because the Cipolle operation had got out of sync with the local community, the local suppliers, and both I and John Key had to go down to I've forgotten the name of the regional center of it, but the place in southern Chile where the dairy industry of Chile is concentrated, and things were getting really out of hand. So I just wanted to basically positively reinforce you, Marcus, for treating this not as PR, but actually getting out there and doing real stuff with the community, because I think in the long run, it will pay dividends in terms of the security of your investment.
Thank you, Tim. I was just about to invite people to respond to each other, because we've got about a couple more minutes left before we have to do some closing commentary. Are there any questions before we invite Stephanie Honey to bring it all together to that a panelist would like to ask of another panelist, or just to leapfrog on what another person has said? And I think you've already begun doing that. This is just about a 2-minute opportunity to do the same if you wish. Okay, not at the moment. So what we'll then do then, thank you for those really lovely comments. You know, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the macro to the very real, from perceptions to authentic corporate social responsibility. It's now my pleasure to begin wrapping things up, and there's no one better to do that really than the Associate Director of the New Zealand International Business Forum, Stephanie Honey. She's a member of the CAPE's Advisory Board, just to offer some sympathising or summary remarks on bringing it together to help us advance the CAPE's mission to sort of influence public debates.
Thanks so much, Matthew, and warm thanks and appreciation as well to this amazing, diverse panel of speakers that you've brought together this morning. It has been fantastic, and I know I speak for all of the audience in saying that. I guess to sum it up, I'd say really a lot of this has been a love letter to Mexico. It's not a well-known market in New Zealand, but in fact, I think it's been very vividly illustrated this morning that it's something that all New Zealand businesses should be taking a serious look at. We've heard from a diverse range of businesses and business commentators about the huge potential that Mexico could have for New Zealand, and developing a sort of beneficial two-way relationship there. Marcus Driller from Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, Greg Balla from Wellington Drive, and Steve Jones from Nzte giving the broader sort of overview, all really pointed out the very sophisticated and capable manufacturing capacity there, capable people who are talented, not just in a technical sense, but also at engaging with customers and building relationships, even software development. You know, I think Mexico is obviously well known for its great manufacturing capacity, but there is a much deeper and broader sort of engagement with the knowledge economy there as well. And of course, the IP systems, which are intellectual property, which are absolutely critical to enabling very sophisticated, modern, value-adding services and goods ecosystems. So, you know, huge potential there, and what could be more important for New Zealand and Mexico and every other economy in these COVID times. Equally, we heard a note of caution from Professor Murray about perceptions or reality around buccaneer capitalism, as he described it, perceptions around environment, labour, how do these sort of social context concerns weigh into the business decisions that New Zealand businesses make. At the same time, very eloquently, Kellie Meiman talked about the real focus from the US, at least, on some of those more sort of the social context for trade and the pressure that trade tools are bringing to bear on some of those. I mean, I guess I would make the observation that everybody's got workers, and you know, one economy's worker-centric trade policy may also have an impact on the workers in other economies too, and not to mention some of those broader social contexts which very much underpin New Zealand's Trade for All strategy around gender equality, the role of women, Indigenous populations, and so on. We also heard some fascinating comments about the sort of trade policy and business models and supply chains context for all of this, very topical issues for all involved in trade and economic activity. We heard from Tim Grosser, who could be more expert on these sort of broad sweeping picture, and from Kellie and Ambassador Traslosheros, of course, around the changes in business models, supply chains and trade policy, the shifts towards nearshoring and the perfect position that Mexico has in that context, not just in terms of geography, but also because of the dynamic for the US now around doing other trade deals. Mexico is a marvelous gateway to that huge dynamic US market, but also the security of the trade flows now, thanks to USMCA between the US and Mexico. The transformation of business models that Tim talked about, and I know the McKinsey Global Institute has done some fascinating work there on globalization, nearshoring, all of those trends that we're seeing even prior to this current very difficult sort of paralysis and choking up of global supply chains that are making life very difficult for New Zealand exporters. And then finally, because my heart lies with trade policy, we heard some great comments on trade policy. Kellie and Tim both talking very eloquently about this evolving picture, the social license for trade needing to be shored up and then sort of rebuilt, reconstructed in the US in particular, building that domestic consensus for launching a sort of revitalized trade policy. Tim rightly pointing out, I think that this is still very much a space to watch, the evolution of worker-focused trade policy and where that may all go. So I guess what I took out of those, really fascinating insights is it's really important for New Zealand businesses to be aware of opportunities. Mexico should obviously be sort of top of mind, whether you're in manufacturing, the knowledge economy, or many other sectors. And it's more important than it's ever been for New Zealand businesses to maintain that sort of optionality about where they go and what the opportunities are. I think we also heard very powerfully from our business speakers the importance of relationships. I think there's clearly some common outlook between New Zealand and Mexico, and the potential to build really fantastic relationships, business to business, but also with customers. But I think I'd like to finish just with a bit of broader context, given the Cape's context for this conversation, but also work that I have been very privileged to do this year in connection with APEC and other relationships. I think the relationship between the US and Mexico is a really interesting illustration of the sort of variable geometry that we see now in the world, the potential for that relationship not only to be strengthened bilaterally, but also in the context of APEC, where New Zealand obviously has worked very hard this year to provide that perfect excuse for a conversation that APEC can give. Some fascinating developments we've seen recently around other economies looking to join CPTPP, which of course the US was a member, Mexico is a member, New Zealand's there in the driving seat of a lot of that. Even more sector-specific agreements like the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. It'd be fantastic to see USMCA partners, where there's a very sophisticated e-commerce chapter, come on board that New Zealand-led sort of concerted open plurilateral model as well, given the interesting insights we heard about cloud computing and software, in connection with Wellington Drive's work there. So overall, marvelous webinar. Thank you so much, Matthew, and all the speakers. I think the audience will have got a huge amount of really rich insight out of that discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for that wonderful summary. We're about to there's one more speaker you've got to hear from, the Mexican ambassador to New Zealand, but before he speaks, I'd like to invite my colleague, Peter Mcminiman, of the President of the Latin American New Zealand Business Council, to give a formal vote of thanks to all our speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all those who've joined in today. Obviously, we work hard at the Latin American New Zealand Business Council with the Cape and Nzte and universities and business to try and propose and encourage more trade and interaction with Latin America, and this is a fantastic way to give more information and education about that. So thank you so much to you all.
Thank you, Peter. Ambassador Perez Bravo, the current Mexican ambassador to New Zealand, we've heard from your predecessor. Would you just like to give some final remarks before I close?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks, Matthew, for this invitation, for organizing this important seminar. I want to salute Sarah Mayman, my dear colleague in Mexico, and congratulate her. You are beginning with the full speed, and I'm very happy for that, Sarah, and I wish you the best. I want to say that I feel very a big honor to be with Honourable Tim Grosser, who is a person that I've been following and I admire his career. So I'm very happy to join this seminar with you. And of course, to say hello to Gerardo Traslosheros, who is, he was ambassador of Mexico in New Zealand, and he finished in 2018, but he still has a lot of friends here in New Zealand, and I'm very happy for that. You did a wonderful job here, Gerardo. And I want to say congratulations to all the distinguished speakers this morning. I've been learning a lot of things today, and I have to say that has been a very productive morning with a lot of important information, especially for our friends in New Zealand who are thinking in investing abroad. I agree with Stephanie that the Mexican market is not very well known in New Zealand. And this kind of exercise, like the one you organize, Matthew, are very useful. So I thank you once again for that. Just let me say it very quick that, because sometimes I have this debate with my European colleagues, but North American market is still the largest market in the world, a regional market. And it's a fantastic, powerful player in the global economy, especially for the development of new technologies and for increasingly large and diverse production chains. The new free trade agreement between Mexico, United States, and Canada offers a great legal certainty for all companies entering in this large market. In 46 years of working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, supporting Mexicans and foreign businessmen, I can conclude that the most important thing for a businessman is to have a legal certainty in the place where he or she is going to invest. And Mexico offers that. The other thing that the businessman or businesswomen are looking, and is my advice, is a reliable local partner. And of course, to make a lot of profits. And that's the Mexican market. And if you add that when you get into the Mexican market, you are in the North American market, the largest in the world, then you are really with a lot of opportunities. I like very much the idea to invite a businessman to having already business in Mexico and to share experience with the people in the seminar, because in my opinion, that's the best way to transmit the real picture of what is going on in the market, in the local market. So I thanks all the business participants this morning. I think your comments are extremely important, and those comments are the high value for the people who are listening to you. Let me finish to say that I join Ambassador Mayman in underlying the advantages offered by the Mexican market in particular. And for that reason, I ask the businessman, businesswomen interested in Mexico to be in contact with the embassies. I know that Sarah is going to agree with me that both embassies are maybe the first door that they can knock asking for support. So we are very happy. I'm very happy to receive any request, any question that will really make our job more easy. So once again, thank you very much and congratulations, Matthew. I'm looking forward for the second version of this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for those lovely words. There may well be regional versions of the seminar rolled out, COVID depending, just before Christmas. That is to be confirmed. We may be partnering on that initiative, and if we can meet again in person. For now, though, it's my pleasure and honor to thank you all for your generosity in speaking, for contributing to the work of the Latin America Cape, for this trade environment series we're doing, where we're raising new ideas, sensitive ideas sometimes, exciting ideas, but generally underexplored ideas. So we're going to carry on doing that over the next 6 months to change the conversation about New Zealand and Latin America. Final word, though, is that all 3 of the Capes are active in similar conversations. There is going to be an APEC webinar next Thursday running across all 3 of the Capes. So if you'd like information about that, please do reach out to us. But I see we're over time. You've all got a day or an evening ahead of you. So thank you for your being with us today. We've got a great crowd. We will be making copies of this entire presentation available to everyone who attended, plus those who registered and couldn't make it. But thanks so much, above all, to our speakers for some superb comments, for weaving together a very broad topic in a really coherent way, raising lots of related issues, and for honouring us with your time. So thank you again for all. We'll close it here. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.